Officer Michael Davis stopped mid-stride when he saw the vagrant extend his hands toward the handcuffs without being asked. The man's eyes held something that made Davis forget his standard arrest procedure for a moment. Behind him, Officer Thompson snorted with laughter. "You see that, Davis? Guy thinks he's some kind of prophet or something. Been telling everyone downtown he's here to forgive their sins." The homeless man stood perfectly still beside the church steps, his worn clothing contrasting sharply with the calm authority in his voice when he spoke. "I know you're just doing your job, officer. These chains cannot hold what they were never meant to contain." Davis shook off the strange feeling and snapped the cuffs into place with practiced efficiency. The man offered no resistance, but something about his willing submission felt different from every other arrest in Davis's 15-year career. The metal clicked shut with a sound that seemed to echo longer than it should have in the empty downtown street. "Just another vagrant causing problems at St. Mary's," Davis muttered to Thompson while guiding his prisoner toward the patrol car. But as they walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that the man's weathered hands felt somehow familiar, like he'd seen those particular scars before in a place he couldn't quite remember. The handcuffs clicked open for the third time as Davis pulled into the station parking lot. He slammed the brakes and turned around, staring at his prisoner's freed hands resting calmly in his lap. "How do you keep doing that?" The man's eyes met his in the rearview mirror with gentle patience. "Michael, your daughter Sarah called the hospital again last night. She's been waiting for you to visit since the accident 3 weeks ago." Davis felt his blood turn cold. He'd never mentioned his daughter's name to anyone at work, and certainly hadn't told Thompson about the family crisis he'd been avoiding. The radio crackled with static whenever he tried to call in their location, producing only white noise and broken transmission. Thompson leaned against the passenger door, watching his partner struggle with the cuffs again. "You having trouble with your equipment there, Davis?" The metal restraints had somehow unlocked themselves again while Davis wasn't looking. His prisoner sat motionless, making no attempt to escape despite having multiple opportunities. Instead, the man spoke quietly about forgiveness and second chances while Davis fumbled with a mechanical failure that defied every logical explanation. "Sir, I need you to explain how you're doing this. Some doors, officer, can only be opened from the inside. Your heart has been locked much longer than these hands." Sergeant Reynolds watched the booking camera malfunction for the fourth time, producing only brilliant white light where the prisoner's face should appear. The fingerprint scanner refused to register any prints, despite the man pressing his fingers firmly against the glass surface. "What's wrong with this equipment tonight?" Officer Martinez stepped closer to observe the processing, then froze when the prisoner turned toward him. "You still carry your brother's picture in your wallet, don't you? He forgives you for the argument before he deployed." Martinez stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Nobody knew about Roberto's death or their final bitter words before his brother shipped overseas. The prisoner hadn't been searched yet, couldn't possibly know about the worn photograph hidden behind Martinez's credit cards. Davis tried the handcuffs one more time, watching them spring open the moment metal touched the man's wrists. The security monitors flickered with strange interference patterns whenever their cameras focused on holding cell 3. 2 other officers gathered around the surveillance equipment, pointing at the impossible readings. Thompson shook his head in disbelief. "In 20 years of police work, I've never seen anything like this." The prisoner stood calmly in the center of the chaos, speaking softly to each officer about their deepest regrets and unspoken hopes. His presence filled the station with an inexplicable peace that made everyone's standard procedures feel suddenly meaningless and inadequate. Davis's phone buzzed with an emergency call just as he finished the paperwork that refused to process correctly. The hospital's number flashed on his screen, the same one he'd been ignoring for 3 weeks since Sarah's accident. "Officer Davis, this is Dr. Chun at Memorial. Your daughter is asking for you again. Her condition has worsened since yesterday." His hands trembled as he ended the call. Behind him, the prisoner spoke from a holding cell with impossible knowledge of the conversation. "Sarah forgives you for missing her graduation, Michael. She understands why you couldn't face the hospital after losing Linda. Davis spun around, his heart pounding. Nobody at the station knew about his wife's death 6 months ago or his daughter's car accident. He'd kept both tragedies private, drowning his grief in overtime shifts and avoiding the hospital where Linda had taken her final breath. Reynolds approached with a booking sheet that somehow kept erasing itself whenever they tried to enter the prisoner's information. "We can't seem to process this guy through the system. Everything we type disappears." The prisoner's voice carried through the bars with gentle authority. "Your daughter needs her father more than your fear needs its hiding place. Some wounds can only heal when love chooses courage over comfort." Davis stared at the man who knew his deepest pain, feeling his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble under the weight of truth he'd been avoiding. Davis found himself standing before the holding cell, drawn by an inexplicable pull he couldn't resist. The prisoner sat peacefully on the bench, his presence radiating a calm that seemed to quiet every sound in the busy station. "I should have been there when the truck hit her car. Should have answered her calls after the funeral. Your guilt has become a prison more confining than these bars, Michael." Linda's last words were about how proud she was of the man you'd become. Sarah heard them too. Davis gripped the cell bars, his knuckles white with tension. How could this stranger know about his wife's final moments in the ICU? He'd been the only one present when Linda whispered her love and pride through labored breathing, telling him to take care of their daughter. Officer Johnson walked past carrying coffee, then stopped abruptly when he noticed the holding cell's temperature had dropped 20 degrees. His breath came out in visible puffs despite the station's working heater. "Why is it so cold over here?" The prisoner's voice continued with gentle persistence. "Fear has kept you from Sarah's bedside for 3 weeks. Love is stronger than fear, but only when we choose to let it be." Davis felt tears he'd been suppressing since the funeral began to blur his vision, the weight of months of avoidance and guilt finally overwhelming his defenses in the presence of someone who knew every detail of his hidden pain. The station lights flickered as more officers gathered around the holding area, drawn by reports of the unexplained phenomena. Sergeant Reynolds called for maintenance to check the electrical systems, but the technician found nothing wrong with the building's power grid. Martinez whispered to Thompson about the impossible temperature variations and equipment malfunctions. "This isn't natural, man. Something's happening here that we can't explain." Davis remained transfixed by the prisoner's knowing eyes, feeling exposed in ways that terrified him. The man spoke about Linda's favorite hymn, the one she hummed while cooking Sunday dinners, details no stranger could possibly know. "She used to sing Amazing Grace while making your pancakes, didn't she?" Sarah inherited her mother's voice, but you haven't heard her sing since the accident. The words hit Davis like physical blows. His wife's morning ritual had been their private joy, shared only between husband and wife in the quiet moments before Sarah woke up. No police report, no hospital record, no public information could have revealed such intimate family details. Officer Stevens entered the booking area carrying a stack of files that immediately scattered when he approached the cell, papers flying in all directions despite the absence of any wind. The prisoner watched calmly as chaos erupted around him while maintaining an aura of perfect peace. "Your daughter dreams of hearing you say you're proud of her, Michael. The same words Linda spoke about you." Davis stepped closer to the cell, his heart racing as recognition began to dawn. The scars on the man's wrists weren't from handcuffs or street life, but something far more profound and ancient. The gentle authority in his voice, the impossible knowledge, the way every system failed in his presence. "Who are you?" The prisoner stood slowly, and, as he did, a warmth filled the holding area that made every officer present feel simultaneously humbled and loved. The fluorescent lights steadied into a soft glow that seemed to emanate from the man himself rather than the fixtures above. "I am the one who knows your heart, Michael. I am the one who wept with you at Linda's bedside and who waits with Sarah now." Officer Martinez dropped his coffee cup, the ceramic shattering on the floor as the truth struck him like lightning. Thompson backed against the wall, his face pale with recognition. Sergeant Reynolds removed his hat instinctively, an act of reverence he couldn't explain. The handcuffs that had been unlocking throughout the evening fell completely away from the prisoner's wrists, clattering to the concrete floor with a sound that echoed through the silent station. No one moved to retrieve them. No one spoke. The presence filling the space was too sacred, too overwhelming for words. Davis fell to his knees, understanding finally washing over him with crushing clarity and infinite mercy. The cell door swung open without anyone touching it, the electronic lock clicking softly in the profound silence that had settled over the station. Jesus stepped forward, his presence filling the space with peace that transcended understanding. Davis remained on his knees, tears streaming down his face as 15 years of spiritual blindness gave way to overwhelming clarity. I arrested you. I put you in handcuffs. And yet you were only doing what you believed was right, Michael. There is no condemnation for those who seek justice, even when they cannot see clearly. The other officers stood transfixed as Jesus moved among them, speaking quietly to each man about their fears and hopes. Martinez felt the guilt over his brother's death lift from his shoulders like a physical weight being removed. Thompson's cynicism melted away in the presence of unconditional love. Sergeant Reynolds found his voice first, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Sir, we're sorry. We didn't know." Jesus placed a gentle hand on Davis's shoulder, and immediately the officer felt a peace he hadn't experienced since Linda's death. The crushing grief that had isolated him from his daughter began to dissolve under the touch of infinite compassion. "There is work for you to do, Michael. Sarah needs her father, and this city has many forgotten souls who need someone to see them as I see them." Davis understood that his encounter would change everything about how he served and protected. Jesus turned toward the station's exit, but paused at the desk where Davis had been struggling with the paperwork all evening. The blank forms suddenly filled themselves with perfect handwriting that none of the officers recognized, yet somehow felt familiar to each of them. The report documented a simple interaction with a homeless individual who was released without charges after providing assistance to community members in need. No mention of the miraculous events or supernatural phenomena appeared in the official record, yet every officer understood the truth of what they had witnessed. Davis rose to his feet, his badge feeling heavier with new purpose. "Master, I don't know how to undo what I've done. How do I serve you after this?" "By serving the least of these, Michael. Every person you encounter carries my image, whether you recognize it or not. Start with Sarah. She's been waiting long enough." As Jesus walked toward the door, the station's atmosphere gradually returned to normal. The temperature stabilized, the lights stopped flickering, and the equipment resumed proper function. But something fundamental had changed in each man present. Martinez picked up his phone to call his mother for the first time since Roberto's funeral. Thompson began thinking about the homeless veteran he'd arrested earlier that week. Sergeant Reynolds quietly removed the disciplinary actions he'd been planning to file against struggling officers. Davis grabbed his keys and badge, understanding finally that his real work was just beginning. The hospital where Sarah waited no longer felt like a place of death, but of hope. Davis drove through the quiet city streets toward Memorial Hospital, his hands steady on the wheel for the first time in months. The fear that had paralyzed him since Linda's death had been replaced by an overwhelming need to hold his daughter and ask for her forgiveness. Sarah's room was dimly lit when he arrived, but her eyes opened immediately as he entered. "Dad?" She reached toward him with trembling hands, her voice weak but filled with joy he didn't deserve. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I should have been here every day. I was just so afraid of losing you too." Sarah's tears mixed with his as they embraced, 3 weeks of separation melting away in the healing power of presence and forgiveness. She told him about her dreams of her mother singing, about her prayers for his return, about her faith that he would eventually find his way back to her. The nursing staff watched in amazement as Sarah's vital signs improved dramatically during their reunion. Her doctor later called it an unexpected turn toward recovery that defied medical explanation. Davis spent the night beside her bed, sharing stories about Linda and promising to never let fear separate them again. When morning came, he called Sergeant Reynolds to request a transfer to community outreach, specifically working with the homeless population downtown. The very streets where he had arrested Jesus would become his mission field for serving others who lived forgotten and overlooked by society. 3 months later, Davis walked his new beat through downtown with eyes transformed by purpose. The same streets where he had once seen only problems now revealed human beings carrying stories of loss, addiction, and forgotten dreams. His uniform had become a symbol of hope rather than fear. Officer Martinez joined him on most shifts, both men having requested transfers to the community outreach unit that Sergeant Reynolds had created after their encounter. Together, they carried supplies, shared meals, and listened to stories that other officers had never bothered to hear. The homeless community began trusting them in ways that surprised the entire department. Crime rates dropped not because of more arrests, but because people felt seen and valued. Davis started each shift by visiting St. Mary's Church, the same steps where he had first encountered Jesus. Sarah had made a complete recovery and often joined her father's volunteer work on weekends, bringing sandwiches and blankets to their new friends on the streets. Her voice had indeed inherited her mother's gift, and she sang hymns that brought tears to hardened faces. Thompson and other officers began requesting additional training on mental health crisis intervention and addiction resources. The station that had once processed society's problems with cold efficiency now approached each person as an individual worthy of dignity and care. Davis never spoke publicly about that night, but his transformed approach to policing became a living testimony that influenced the entire department's culture. 1 year after his encounter with Jesus, Davis stood before the St. Mary's congregation sharing his testimony for the first time. The church had invited him to speak about the transformation that had revolutionized their city's approach to serving the forgotten. "I arrested the Son of God and put him in handcuffs," he told the packed sanctuary. But his response wasn't judgment. It was love that opened my eyes to see every person as he sees them. In the front row sat Martinez, Thompson, and Sergeant Reynolds, all of whom had found their own paths back to faith through witnessing that miraculous night. Sarah played piano as the congregation sang Amazing Grace, her mother's favorite hymn filling the sacred space with healing memory. The community outreach program had expanded citywide, with other police departments requesting training on the compassionate policing model they had developed. Social workers, chaplains, and mental health professionals now worked alongside officers to address root causes rather than just symptoms. Davis closed his testimony with words that had become his daily prayer. When we see someone society has forgotten, we might be entertaining angels unaware. But that night, I learned something even more profound. Sometimes the divine chooses to dwell among the least of these, waiting to transform our hearts through grace we never deserved. If this story touched something in you, maybe a memory of unexpected grace or a moment when someone saw your worth when others couldn't, share that story in the comments below.